All right, Bobby, let me get you spotlighted and then we'll get going. And I'm going to mute us, and then Bobby, you're off and rolling.
Okay, so last week, the Zuckermans and the Arbels got to the fair. Remember that the highlight so far of Fern's life is she got to ride the Ferris wheel with her best friend now, Henry. She got stuck on the very top and they got to see the whole fair. They met the pig called Uncle, who was humongous, which was a little scary for them because they were worried about how that was going to work out, winning the prize for their own beloved Wilbert. The rat got to go on the midway at night and he bloated himself up. He had such a great evening. It was the most fabulous night of his life. There was a sudden announcement from the judge's booth because when everyone got back after they went to the fairgrounds and they rested and then they came back the next day, there was already a ribbon hanging on Uncle's pin that said first prize. And they were stunned. They couldn't believe that Wilbert didn't win first prize. But all of a sudden, there was an announcement from the judge's stand that said, Mr. Homer Zuckerman is to bring his famous pig to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand for a special award. So that's where we left off, okay? And everyone now is very excited. In fact, the Zuckermans and the Arbels had just finished washing Wilbert with another douse of buttermilk, okay? It's chapter 20, the hour of triumph. Special announcement, said the loudspeaker in a pompous voice. The management of the fair takes great pleasure in presenting Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman and his famous pig. The truck bearing this extraordinary animal is now approaching the infield. Kindly stand back and give the truck room to proceed. In a few moments, the pig will be unloaded in the special judging ring in front of the grandstand, where a special award will be made. Will the crowd please make way and let the truck pass? Thank you. Wilbur trembled when he heard the speech. He felt happy but dizzy. The truck crept along slowly in slow speed. Crowds of people surrounded it, and Mr. Arbel had to drive very carefully in order not to run over anybody. At last, he managed to reach the judge's stand. Avery jumped out and lowered the tailgate. I'm scared to death, whispered Mr. Zuckerman. Hundreds of people are looking at us. Cheer up, replied Mrs. Arbel. This is fun. Unload your pig, please, said the loudspeaker. All together now, boys, said Mr. Zuckerman. Several men stepped forward from the crowd to help lift the crate. Avery was the busiest helper of all. Tuck your shirt in, Avery, cried Mrs. Zuckerman, and tighten your belt. Your pants are coming down. Can't you see I'm busy, replied Avery in disgust. Look, cried Fern, pointing. There's Henry. Don't shout, Fern, said her mother, and don't point. Can I please have some money, asked Fern. Henry invited me to go on the Ferris wheel again, only I don't think he has any money left. He ran out of money. Mrs. Arbel opened her handbag. Here, she said, here is 40 cents. Now don't get lost and be back at our regular meeting place by the pig pen very soon. Fern raced off, ducking and dodging through the crowd in search of Henry. The Zuckerman pig is now being taken from his crate, boomed the voice of the loudspeaker. Stand by for an announcement. Tippleton crouched under the straw at the bottom of the crate. What a lot of nonsense, murmured the rat. What a lot of fuss about nothing. Oh, in the pig pen, silent and alone, Charlotte rested. Her two front legs embraced the egg sac. Charlotte could hear everything that was said on the loudspeaker, and the words gave her courage. This was her hour of triumph. As Wilbert came out of the crate, the crowd clapped and cheered. Mr. Zuckerman took off his cap and bowed. Lovery pulled his big handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from the back of his neck. Avery knelt in the dirt by Wilbert's sides, busily stroking him and showing off. Mrs. Zuckerman and Mrs. Arbel stood on the running board of the truck. Ladies and gentlemen, said the loudspeaker, we now present Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman's distinguished pig. The fame of this unique animal has spread to the far corners of the earth, attracting many valuable tourists to our great state. Many of you will recall that never to be forgotten day last summer when the writing appeared mysteriously on the spider's web in Zuckerman's barn. calling the attention of all and sundry to the fact that this pig was completely out of the ordinary. This miracle has never been fully explained, although learned men have visited Zuckerman's pig pen to study and observe the phenomena. In the last analysis, we simply know that we are dealing with supernatural forces here, and we should all feel proud and grateful. In the words of the spider's web, ladies and gentlemen, this is some pig. Wilbert blushed. He stood perfectly still and tried to look his best. This magnificent animal, continued the loudspeaker, is truly terrific. Look at him, ladies and gentlemen. Note the smoothness and whiteness of the coat. Observe the spotless skin, the healthy pink glow of ears and snout. It's the buttermilk, whispered Mrs. Arable to Mrs. Zuckerman. Note the general radiance of this animal. Then remember the day when the word radiant appeared clearly on the web. Whence came this mysterious writing? Not from the spider. We can rest assured of that. Spiders are very clever at weaving their webs, but needless to say, spiders cannot write. Oh, they can't they? Murmured Charlotte to herself. Ladies and gentlemen, continued the loudspeaker, I must not take any more of your valuable time. On behalf of the governors of the fair, I have the honor of awarding a special prize of $25 to Mr. Zuckerman, together with a handsome bronze medal, suitably engraved, in token of our appreciation of the part played by this pig, this radiant, this terrific, this humble pig, and attracting so many visitors to our great county fair. Oh, Wilbert had been feeling dizzier and dizzier through this long, complimentary speech. When he heard the crowd begin to cheer and clap again, he suddenly fainted away. His legs collapsed, his mind went blank, and he fell to the ground, unconscious. What's wrong? Asked the loudspeaker. What's going on, Zuckerman? What's the trouble with your pig? Avery was kneeling by Wilbert's head, stroking him. Mr. Zuckerman was dancing about, fanning him with his cap. He's all right, cried Mr. Zuckerman. He gets these spells. He's modest and can't stand praise. Well, we can't give a prize to a dead pig, said the loudspeaker. It's never been done. He isn't dead, hollered Zuckerman. He's fainted. He gets embarrassed easily. Run for some water, Lovery. Lovery sprang from the judge's ring and disappeared. Templeton poked his head from the straw. He noticed at the end of Wilbert's tail was within reach. Wilbert grinned. I'll tend to this, he chuckled. He took Wilbert's tail in his mouth and bit it, just as hard as he could bite. The pain revived Wilbert. In a flash, he was back on his feet. Ouch, he screamed. Hooray, yelled the crowd. He's up. The pig is up. Good work, Zuckerman. That son pig. Everyone was delighted. Mr. Zuckerman was the most pleased of all. He sighed with relief. Nobody had seen Templeton. The rat has done his work well. Okay, and there's Avery, Wilbert, and there is Templeton. Okay, he's doing his job too. Now, one of the judges climbed into the ring with the prizes. He handed Mr. Zuckerman two $10 bills and a $5 bill. And then he tied the medal around Wilbert's neck. And then he shook hands with Mr. Zuckerman while Wilbert blushed. Avery put out his hand and the judge shook hands with him too. The crowd cheered. A photographer took Wilbert's picture. A great feeling of happiness swept over Zuckerman's and the Arbles. This was the greatest moment in Mr. Zuckerman's life. It is deeply satisfying to win a prize in front of a lot of people. As Wilbert was being shoved back into the crate, Lovery came charging through the crowd, carrying a pail of water. His eyes had a wild look. Without hesitating a second, he dashed the water at Wilbert. In his excitement, he missed his aim, and the water splashed all over Mr. Zuckerman and Avery, and they got soaking wet. This is just before the water incident. And there's a photographer, the handshaking, the passing of the bills, and Wilbert getting his medal. There. For goodness sake, bellowed Mr. Zuckerman, who was really drenched. What ails you, Lovery? Can't you see the pig is all right? Well, you asked for water, said Lovery meekly. I didn't ask for a shower bath, said Mr. Zuckerman. The crowd roared with laughter. Finally, Mr. Zuckerman had to laugh too. And of course, Avery was tickled to find himself so wet. And he immediately started to act like a clown. He pretended he was taking a shower bath. He made faces and danced around and rubbed imaginary soap under his armpits. And then he dried himself with an imaginary towel. Avery, stop it, cried his mother. Stop showing off. But the crowd loved it. Avery heard nothing but applause. He liked being a clown in a ring with everyone watching in front of a grandstand. When he discovered there was still a little water left in the bottom of the pail, he raised the pail high in the air and dumped the water on himself and made faces. The children in the grandstand screamed with appreciation. At last, things calmed down. Wilbert was loaded into the truck. Avery was led from the ring by his mother and placed on the seat of the truck to dry off. The truck, driven by Mr. Arble, crawled slowly back to the pig pen. Avery's wet trousers made a big wet spot on the seat. Chapter 21, The Last Day. Charlotte and Wilbert were alone. The families had gone to look for Fern. Templeton was asleep. Wilbert lay resting after the excitement and strain of the ceremony. His medal still hung from his neck. By looking out of the corner of his eye, he could see it. Charlotte, said Wilbert after a while, why are you so quiet? I like to sit still, she said. I've always been rather quiet. Yes, but you seem specially so today. Do you feel all right? A little tired, perhaps, but I feel peaceful. Your success in the ring this morning was, to a small degree, my success. Your future is assured. You will live, secure and safe, Wilbert. Nothing can harm you now. These autumn days will shorten and grow cold. The leaves will shake loose from the trees and fall. Christmas will come, and then the snows of winter. You will live to enjoy the beauty of the frozen world, for you mean a great deal to Zuckerman, and he will not harm you ever. Winter will pass, the days will lengthen, the ice will melt in the pasture pond. The song sparrow will return and sing, the frogs will awaken, and the warm wind will blow again. All these sights and sounds and smells will be yours to enjoy, Wilbert, this lovely world, these precious days. Charlotte stopped. A moment later, a tear came to Wilbert's eye. Oh, Charlotte, he said, to think that when I first met you, I thought you were cruel and bloodthirsty. When he recovered from his emotion, he spoke again. Why did you do this all for me? He asked. I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you. You had been my friend, replied Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life anyway? We're born, we live a little while, and we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heavens knows, anyone's life can stand a little of that. Well, said Wilbert, I'm no good at making speeches. I haven't got your gift for words, but you have saved me, Charlotte, and I would gladly give my life for you. I really would. I'm sure you would. And I thank you for your generous sentiments. Charlotte, said Wilbert, we're all going home today. The fair is almost over. Won't it be wonderful to be back home in the barn cellar again with the sheep and the geese? Aren't you anxious to get home? For a moment, Charlotte said nothing, and then she spoke in a voice so low, Wilbert could hardly hear the words. I will not be going back to the barn. Wilbert leaped to his feet. Not going back, he cried. Charlotte, what are you talking about? I'm done for, she replied. In a day or two, I'll be dead. I haven't even strength enough to climb down into the crate. I doubt if I have enough silk in my spinnerets to lower me to the ground. Hearing this, Wilbert threw himself down in an agony of pain and sorrow. Great sobs racked his body. He heaved and he grunted with desolation. Charlotte, Charlotte, my true friend. Come now, let's not make a scene, said the spider. Quiet, Wilbert. Stop thrashing about. But I can't stand it, shouted Wilbert. I won't leave you here alone to die. If you're going to stay here, I shall stay too. Don't be ridiculous, said Charlotte. You can't stay here. Zuckerman and Lovely and John Arble and the others will be back any minute now, and they'll shove you into the crate and away you'll go. Besides, it wouldn't make any sense for you to stay. There would be no one to feed you. The fairgrounds will soon be empty and deserted. Wilbert was in a panic. He raced around and around the pen. Suddenly he had an idea. He thought of the egg sack and the 514 little spiders that would hatch in the spring. If Charlotte herself wasn't able to go home to the barn, at least he must take her children along. Wilbert rushed to the front of his pen. He put his front feet up on the top board and gazed around. In the distance, he saw the Arbles and the Zuckermans approaching. He knew he would have to act quickly. "Where's Templeton?" he demanded. "Oh, he's in that corner under the straw asleep," said Charlotte. Wilbert rushed over, pushed his strong snout under the rat, and tossed him into the air. "Templeton!" screamed Wilbert. "Pay attention!" The rat, surprised out of a sound sleep, looked first dazed and then disgusted. "What kind of monkey shine is this?" he growled. "Can a rat catch a wink of sleep without being rudely popped into the air?" "Listen to me," cried Wilbert. "Charlotte is very ill. She only has a short time to live. She cannot accompany us home because of her condition. Therefore, it's absolutely necessary that I take her egg sack with me. I can't reach it, and I can't climb. You're the only one that can get it. There's not a second to be lost. The people are coming. They'll be here in no time. Please, 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 Templeton, climb up and get the egg sack." The rat yawned. He straightened his whiskers and then he looked up at the egg sack. "So," he said in disgust, "so it's old Templeton to the rescue again, is it? Templeton, do this. Templeton, do that. Templeton, please run down to the dump and get me a magazine clipping. Templeton, please lend me a piece of string so I can spin a web." "Oh, hurry," said Wilbert. "Hurry up, Templeton." But the rat was in no hurry. He began imitating Wilbert's voice. "So it's hurry up, Templeton, is it? Ho, ho, ho. And what thanks do I ever get for these services? I'd like to know that. Never a kind word for old Templeton. Only abuse, wisecracks, and side remarks. Never a kind word for a rat." "Templeton," said Wilbert in desperation, "if you don't stop talking and get busy, all will be lost and I will die of a broken heart. Please, please climb up." Templeton lay back in the straw. Lazily, he placed his forepaws behind his head, crossed his knees, in an attitude of complete relaxation. "Die of a broken heart," he mimics. "How touching. My. I notice that it's always me you come to when in trouble, but I've never heard of anyone's heart being broken on my account. Oh, no, no. Who cares anything about old Templeton?" "Get up," screamed Wilbert. "Stop acting like a spoiled child." Templeton grinned and lay still. "Who made trip after trip to the dump?" he asked. "Why, it was old Templeton. Who saved Charlotte's life by scaring that Arble boy away with the rotten goose egg? Bless my heart, I believe it was old Templeton. Who bit your tail and got you back on your feet this morning after you'd fainted in front of the crowd? Yep, old Templeton. Has it ever occurred to you that I'm sick of running errands and doing favors? What do you think I am, a rat of all work?" Wilbert was desperate. The people were coming and the rat was failing him. Suddenly, Wilbert remembered Templeton's fondness for food. "Templeton," he said, "I will make you a solemn promise. Get Charlotte's egg sack for me, and from now on, I will let you eat first. When Lovery slops me, I will let you have your choice of everything in the trough, and I won't touch a thing until you're through." The rat sat up. "You mean it?" he said. "I promise. I cross my heart." "All right, it's a deal," said the rat. He walked to the wall and started to climb. His stomach was still swollen from last night's gorging. Groaning and complaining, he pulled himself slowly to the ceiling. He crept along till he reached the egg sack. Charlotte moved aside for him. She was dying, but she still had strength enough to move a little. Then Templeton bared his long, ugly teeth and began snipping the threads that fastened the sack to the ceiling. Wilbert watched from below. "Use extreme care," he said. "I don't want a single one of those eggs harmed." "The stuff that's in my mouth," complained the rat. "That's worse than caramel candy." But Templeton worked away at the job, managed to cut the sack adrift and carry it to the ground, where he dropped it in front of Wilbert. Wilbert heaved a great sigh of relief. "Thank you, Templeton," he said. "I will never forget this as long as I live." "Neither will I," said the rat, picking his teeth. "I feel as though I've eaten a spool of thread. Well, home we go." Templeton crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw. He got out of sight just in time. Lovery and John Arble and Mr. Zuckerman came along at that moment, followed by Mrs. Arble and Mrs. Zuckerman and Avery and Fern. Wilbert had already decided how he would carry the egg sack. There was only one way possible. He carefully took the little bundle in his mouth and held it there on top of his tongue. He remembered what Charlotte had told him, that the sack was waterproof and strong. It felt funny on his tongue and made him drool a bit. And of course, he couldn't say anything. But as he was being shoved into the crate, he looked up at Charlotte and gave her a wink. She knew he was saying goodbye in the only way he could, and she knew her children were safe. Goodbye, she whispered, and then she summoned all of her strength and waved one of her front legs at him. She never moved again. Next day, as the Ferris wheel was being taken apart and the racehorses were being loaded into vans and the entertainers were packing up their belongings and driving back in their trailers, Charlotte died. The fairgrounds were soon deserted. The sheds in the building were empty and forlorn. The infill was littered with bottles and trash, and nobody of the hundreds of people that had visited the fair knew that a little gray spider had played the most important part of all. No one was with her when she died. Chapter 22, A Warm Wind. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. His was a very strange homecoming. Around his neck, he wore a medal of honor, and in his mouth, he held a sack of spider's eggs. There is no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled so good. His friends, the sheep and the geese, were glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbert's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen where visitors could examine it. Wilbert himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbert often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web still hung in the doorway. Every day, Wilbert would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lovery brought the squashes and pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor, where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and the birches turned bright colors, and the wind shook them, and they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the little red apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and the foxes came in the night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered the house, the barn, the fields, and the woods. Wilbert had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in the yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down from the lane and out into the frozen pond in the pasture. Coasting is the most fun there is, said Avery. The most fun there is, retorted Fern, is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are in the top car and Henry makes the car swing and we can see everything for miles and miles and miles. Goodness, are you still thinking about that old Ferris wheel, said Avery in disgust. The fair was weeks and weeks ago. Oh, I think about it all the time, said Fern, picking snow from her ear. After Christmas, the thermostat dropped to 10 below zero. Cold settled on the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of the straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn too, for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung about the barnyard the way boys hang around a drugstore, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. Many thanks, they always said when they saw food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig trough was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers, rags, whatever he found a trinket or keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there too. He continued to visit Wilbert 3 times a day, exactly at mealtime, and Wilbert kept his promise. Wilbert let the rat eat first, and then when Templeton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbert would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you ever saw. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. You would live longer, said the old sheep, if you ate less. Well, who wants to live forever, sneered the rat. I am naturally a heavy eater, and I get untold satisfaction from the pleasures of the feast. He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept downstairs to lie down. There is Templeton. Is right. It was just a little too big. All winter, Wilbert watched over Charlotte's egg sack as though he was guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in manure for the sack next to the board fence. On very cold nights, he lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbert, nothing in life was so important as a small round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he waited the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always a rich and steady time when you are waiting for something to happen or to hatch. The winter ended at last. I heard the frogs today, said the old sheep one evening. Listen, you can hear them now. Wilbert stood still and cocked his ears. From the pond in shrill chorus came the voices of hundreds of little frogs. Springtime, said the old sheep thoughtfully. Another spring. And as she walked away, Wilbert saw a new lamb following her. It was only a few hours old. The snows melted and ran away. The streams and the ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened and the mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed whiter and a warm wind blew. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbert stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, no bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray with a black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbert trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. And then Wilbert looked more closely. 2 more little spiders crawled out, and they waved. They climbed around and round in the sack, exploring the new world. Then 3 more little spiders, and then 8, and then 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbert's heart pounded. He began to squeal. Then he raced in circles, kicking manure into the air. And then he turned a backflip. And then he planted his front feet and came to a stop in front of Charlotte's children. Hello there, he said. The first spider said hello, but his voice was so small that Wilbert couldn't hear it. I'm an old friend of your mother, said Wilbert. I'm glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right? The little spiders waved their forelegs at him, and Wilbert could see by the way they acted, they were glad to see him. Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need? The young spiders just waved. For several days and several nights, they crawled here and there, up and down, around and about, waving at Wilbert, trailing tiny drag lines behind them, and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbert couldn't count them, but he knew he had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon each was as big as a baby shot. They made tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened a door on the north side. A warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of damp earth, of spruce woods, of the sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updraft. One spider climbed to the top of the fence, and then it did something that came as a great surprise to Wilbert. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets in the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed a balloon, and as Wilbert watched, the spider let go of the fence and rose into the air. Goodbye, it said as it sailed through the doorway. Wait a minute, screamed Wilbert. Where do you think you're going? But the spider was already out of sight. And then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, made a balloon, and sailed away. Then another spider, and then another. The air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a spider. Wilbert was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing at a great rate. Come back, children, he cried. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. At last, one little spider took time enough to stop and talk to Wilbert before making its balloon. We're leaving here on the warm updraft. This is our moment for setting forth. We are aeronauts, and we are going out into the world to make webs for ourselves. But where? Asked Wilbert. Wherever the wind takes us, high, low, near, far, east, west, north, south, we take to the breeze We go as we please. And there they're leaving. Wilbert is so unhappy. Oh dear. Are all of you going? Asked Wilbur. You can't all go. I would be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want it to be that way. I'm sure of it. The air was now so full of balloonists that the barn cellar looked almost as though a mist had gathered. Balloons by the dozen were rising, circling, and drifting away through the door, sailing off in the gentle wind. Cries of goodbye, goodbye, goodbye came weakly to Wilbert's ears. He couldn't bear to watch anymore. In sorrow, he sank to the ground and closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbert cried himself to sleep. When he woke, it was late afternoon. He looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked into the air. The balloonists were gone. And then he walked drearily to the doorway where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there thinking of her when he heard a small voice. Salutations, it said. I'm up here. So am I, said another tiny voice. So am I, said a third voice. 3 of us are staying. We like this place, and we like you. Wilbert looked up. At the top of the doorway, 3 small webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. Can I take this to mean, said Wilbert, that you have definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar, and that I'm going to have 3 friends? You can indeed, said the spiders. What are your names, please? Asked Wilbert, trembling with joy. And there they are. I'll tell you my name, replied the first little spider, if you tell me why you are trembling. I'm trembling with joy, said Wilbert. Then my name is Joy, said the first spider. Well, what was my mother's middle initial? Asked the second spider. A, said Wilbert. Then my name is Anita, said the spider. Well, how about me? Asked the third spider. Will you just pick out a nice, sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too dumb. Wilbert thought hard. Nellie, he suggested. Fine, I like that very much, said the third spider. You may call me Nellie. And she daintily fastened her orb line to the next spoke of the web. Wilbert's heart brimmed with happiness. He thought he should make a short speech on this very important occasion. Joy and Rana, Nellie, he began. Welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hollow doorway from which to string your webs. I think it is only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever. I pledge mine, said Joy. I do too, said Alina. And so do I, said Nellie, who had just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbert, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As time went on and the months and years came and went, he was never without friends. Fern did not come regularly to the barn anymore. She was growing up and was careful to avoid childish things like sitting on a milk stool near a pig pen. But Charlotte's children and the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, year after year, lived in the doorway. Each spring, there were new little spiders hatching out to take the place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbert all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph and the miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good, night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbert, this warm, delicious cellar with the gregarious pigs, the changing season, the heat of the sun, the passage of swallows, the nearness of rats, the sameness of sheep, the love of spiders, the smell of manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbert never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class by herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer, and Charlotte was both. The end. That is Charlotte's Web. So I have a couple more things to show you. This is St. Francis. It's a statue that a friend gave me. Okay, and St. Francis is one of the most beloved saints in the whole world for all times because he's known for his love of animals. And actually, he loved them so much, and he loved the moon and the stars. He called everything his sister or brother. Okay, so there's St. Francis, and today is his feast day. And yesterday in the paper, it's this picture of a little girl. Oh, I'll get it in my hand. And she has a T-shirt that said, she's in Chelsea, Vermont. And the T-shirt said, "This is just a girl who loves pigs." And she's won a lot of ribbons in the Tunbridge World Fair. So she's carrying on Fern's love of her special pig, Wilbur. And here's another picture of a cow that was being shown in Tunbridge. And it got spooked. So it's making this weird little face. And its owner is sort of doing a grimace right next to it. So this was just taken a few weeks ago from the Tunbridge Fair. So wonderful, wonderful things happen at county fairs. And I think we'll stop now. We'll give us all a chance to do some reflections. Okay, so let me hear what you guys have to say.